This photo is clear in my mind. Out of the dark rises the specter of bricks, wood, shadows, and the moonlight. Spirits seem to pass in and out of these shadows. The walls seem to shrink as time goes on. Father and I waited as instructed outside our barracks. Soon, a capo came to fetch us. We slipped in and out of the shadows. He always seemed to know where the guards would be and how to avoid them. We arrived at a building site in the main camp. The capo whispered to us, "That fellow over there has tools. You are to dismantle anything you can find." We went over to the man with the tools. He gave us small flashlights as well. "They have decided to build a gas chamber here," he whispered to us. "The Allies are very close. We can't let them do it." Father and I each took a hammer, and we slowly and methodically began to take the nails out of the boards and lay them on the ground. We worked for around 2 hours before being taken back to our barracks. Twice, we had to hide behind huge piles of materials as German guards checked the site. We both kept as many nails and small bits of materials as we could to barter later. Father had already developed a busy trade with the SS. In exchange for warm clothes and food, he made them beautiful pieces of small furniture, ornate chairs, and tables. They sent these back to their families for their homes. Often, though, he had somehow to find his own materials, so these nails were very valuable to him. At work the next day, Carl said, "How'd it go?" "Very well," I replied. "I would do anything," I added, "to make sure that a gas chamber is never built here." "Fortunately, most of the workers feel the same way," he replied. "They realize that they are building their own death. They work very slowly during the day, although they make it seem as if they are working furiously hard. Then we dismantle it at night. At this rate, it'll never get built before the Allies get here." "Do you have a radio?" I asked. "Of course," he grinned. Would you like to come and listen one night?" I told him that I would, and so one evening after work he arranged for me to accompany him to a small hut. There were a group of 5 men sat around a radio, and I was able to listen to the BBC for the first time in months. Was it only months ago that I had been taken to Auschwitz? It felt like I'd left Lodz years ago, but now it was February 1945, and the Allies were close. So close. Would they get to us in time to save us? "Don't worry," one of the men said. "We have plans. We won't let them kill us all just before the Allies get here. We have some weapons. We'll fight if we have to." That reassured me a bit. The prospect that terrified me most was being shot by the Nazis the day before our liberation. Now I see picture after picture of the camp. If only I could have had my camera take pictures of what I had witnessed. Buchenwald was a concentration camp with factories. Its purpose forced labor rather than mass extermination. Everyone worked 14 hours a day. There was roll call every morning. Sometimes we'd have to stand for hours in the early morning as they counted and recounted us. I see someone being taken away because he is missing a button on his jacket. He is shot. I see a man beaten almost to death because he did not salute an SS officer. I see 7 young Poles who tried to escape. They were tied to their cots and fed nothing but salt water. Their screams echoed throughout the camp for 3 days until the screams became moans and they died. I see the children from the medical facilities wandering in the grounds. Carl told me that all kinds of horrible experiments were done on them, and on adults too. They all died eventually. I see the luxury and opulence of the living quarters of the SS who ran Buchenwald. Often Carl and I would be ordered to take pictures in a lodge or the zoological gardens. The wealth and lavishness was astonishing. I see the tent city set up for prisoners outside the main camp. I see the concert the children gave. They sang beautiful, moving songs, and the SS sat in the front row and didn't react. Perhaps they didn't understand. The children sang in Polish, German, Russian, and I saw that the human spirit was not dead, not yet. Somehow, Father and I struggled through March. My official job at the studio came to an end because everything in the camp was becoming chaotic. The Allies were close. The Germans knew it was all over. They no longer had time to come to the studio and pose for pictures. In fact, the last thing they wanted was proof in the form of photos of them in uniform that they had been in Buchenwald. Many of them were taking their rank insignia off their uniforms or dumping their uniforms altogether. Carl gave me a camera, though, and told me to take pictures of whatever I could so there would be a record. He gave me the camera on my 18th birthday as a present. I look at the picture in my hand. It was April 2nd. I managed to take it from the window of my studio. Rows of Jewish prisoners being marched out of Buchenwald. Perhaps to their immediate death, perhaps to other camps. Why are you letting this happen? I demanded of Carl, who was a member of the camp resistance group, one of its organizers, in fact. The Germans order we supply them with 4,500 Jews, he replied. We're not strong enough to fight them yet. There are 3,000 guards here. You didn't even try, I scoffed. You don't care about us any more than the SS does. That's not true, Carl replied. To us, everyone is equal. Of course, I replied sarcastically. I believe you. April 4 was Passover, the celebration of the liberation of the Jews from Egypt, where Pharaoh kept them as slaves thousands of years ago. That night, a group of religious Hasidic Jews held a seder in our barracks where they chanted the Haggadah by heart. Everyone who could crowded around, and somehow the memory of past suffering and the fact that our ancestors had survived it gave us courage to try to survive our present suffering. The service always ended with, "Next year in Jerusalem," and that line rang throughout the barracks as we all said it as a prayer for ourselves and for each other. Still, on April 6th, another 8,000 were marched out, non-Jews as well as Jews. Shortly after that, we could hear the fighting as it passed very close to us. Planes buzzed overhead, cannon shells and artillery fire exploded near the camp. The Americans are going after the escaping SS, Carl told me. They seem to have forgotten about us here. Come to the hut tonight. We're organizing a rebellion. We won't just let the Nazis massacre us all. That night, we were each given a firearm to hide. On April 10, we were all driven from our barracks and massed in the courtyard for evacuation. I wondered how I was to get my gun. I had hidden it in the studio after Carl had showed me how to use it. I was sure we'd be massacred without getting a chance to fight, when suddenly the air raid siren wailed and the Germans returned us to the barracks so they could head for cover. They were scared. You could see it in their faces. Father and I did not return to the barracks. On instruction, we hid in the studio. The next morning, the Nazis again got everyone together for evacuation. Father and I were told to hide near the gates. Our job was to disarm or kill the guards there. Our signal was the first explosion of a grenade. We crouched behind a building near the gate. My heart pounded. I was sweating so much the gun felt slippery in my hands. And yet, I felt happy, a feeling I hadn't had in so long. I couldn't even remember when. It would soon be over one way or another. I really didn't mind if I died like this, fighting, and if I lived, they would be our prisoners. An explosion ripped through the camp. The two guards at the gate whirled around, guns pointed in our direction. Father and I shot. They fell. The guard in the tower began to fire. Father cried out and clutched his arm. I raised my gun and shot. The guard fell from the tower with a scream. Father, are you all right? Yeah, it's just my arm. Careful now. You must check the guards and get their guns. Cautiously, I moved toward them. One was dead. One was breathing heavily, blood pouring from a wound in his side. He looked up at me. Help me, he said. Why? I answered. I'm just a filthy Jew. You wouldn't want my help. Father had moved up behind me. Tie a cloth around his wound, Daniel, he said. Every live Nazi is one more we can put on trial. I did what he said. I'm not proud of my reaction, but the hatred and triumph I felt at that moment were stronger than any feeling of kindness. Daniel, my father said to me as I tied the Germans' wounds, we are not like them. If they made us into them, they've succeeded. I know, I replied, but still, I would have liked to have shot them all and seen them suffer first. Come on, Father, I said. We went into the camp. It was all over, and so quickly, it was hard to believe. The SS were surrounded and held in barracks or had run away, too scared to fight. The prisoners had control of the camp. A white flag made out of a tattered bedsheet was being raised on the flagpole so the Americans wouldn't come in shooting. There's something I have to do, I said to Father, who was being cared for by a prisoner who was a doctor. I left him and went looking for my model SS officer. I found him in his house, a prisoner with a gun guarding him. May I speak with him? I asked his guard. Of course, the man replied. Gun in hand, I rushed over to one of the little girls and picked her up. Don't worry, I whispered in her ear. This is only pretend. She nodded and seemed unafraid. No! Screamed her mother. The little boy you shot to death, he had just as much right to live as your child, I said quietly, all my rage pouring out. A life for a life? I waited a moment, but the officer didn't flinch. Then I put the child down and pointed the gun at the SS man's head. Fear sprang into his eyes, and his daughter began to cry. I'll be there to testify at your trial, I promised the officer. Then I left. What did I think I could accomplish with that? Teach them something? It was foolish and stupid and mean. They would never learn. They would always believe that our lives had been worthless and that they were not murderers, just simple folks carrying out orders to wipe out a subhuman species. I stalked away feeling dirty and miserable. When I got back to my father, he smiled at me and motioned me over to him. With his good arm, he gave me a hug. "It's over, Daniel," he said. "It's over." And then I realized that he was right. We were free and alive. I sank down beside him, unable to feel anything but an immense sense of relief. Perhaps happiness would come later.